So I have always loved computers. When I was 12 years old, I would ride my bicycle in the hot 110-degree New Mexico sun to the public library where I checked out books on Fortran and BASIC. Those were the first two programming languages I learned. I would bike home and program my Commodore 64, a computer that my father had bought third-hand at an electronics swap. And my goal was to make my own video games. I was in control when I was using that computer. And when I wrote those programs, I knew this is what I'm going to do with my life. So I go on to the University of North Carolina. I study computer science and mathematics. I get a graduate degree in distributed systems. And when you study computer science, a lot of roads lead out to the Wild West of California. So I'm packing up my car. I had just gotten my master's degree. I'm about to get on I-40. I-40 is the road you can drive from beach to beach, coast to coast. And I asked my advisor, Diane Pozepsky. She had become an IBM fellow. I had taken a job at IBM Research in California. California. I had never been out there before. So I asked Diane, and Diane had spent 30 years at IBM. Any IBMers in the audience? Woo woo. So I asked Diane, what made you most successful? How did you get to this level that very few women ever get to? And she gave me a piece of advice that I will never, ever, ever forget. So she said to me, when you show up at work, look at the leaders in your organization. Maybe that's your manager. Maybe at a startup, it's the CEO. Maybe it's the general manager in your business unit. The attributes of that leader will be the attributes that will be rewarded and promoted within the organization. If the manager is aggressive, extroverted, outgoing, people will be promoted more often. If they're shy, more reserved, that will be rewarded. So when I drove my car down I-40 to California, the first thing I kept in mind was look at the leaders of the organization. This advice will come back in about 10 minutes in an unexpected way. So I show up at IBM. My job was here at Almaden Research Center. Anyone been to Almaden in San Jose? The IBMers are like, yep. So it is situated on a county park. There are cows that roam the hills. Like, can you think of something less New York than like farm animals right outside your office? So I show up. And I have some of the best, this is my early career, I'm having a fantastic time. I'm building systems, I'm cutting my teeth in enterprise software, Big Blue, huge player in enterprise software. I'm working with clients, I'm building systems, I'm learning from more senior engineers, things are going great. A few years in, I get nominated for a program that can fast track you to the executive suite. Now, IBM is based out of Armonk, New York, upstate. So I have these interviews with the executives, and I'm already starting to envision my life in New York. Like, what? I'll have to buy new clothes. I need to buy a coat that goes past my waist. Like, that's a new thing. And I get really excited, and what happens? I don't get it. So I'm 28 years old, and I'm thinking to myself, well, what am I going to do? And so I asked for feedback. Why didn't I get this position? And the feedback was, Julia is a fantastic engineer, like top performer at the company. But exiting an executive fast track program, the expectation is you're going to come in and you're going to manage a group, potentially a business unit. I didn't know anything about business. I knew about math, I knew about stats, I knew about probability, but I didn't fundamentally understand how the business was run. And I thought to myself, I want to fix this. And I'm actually really interested and excited, and I want to learn about business. So, I was at this crossroads. I was like, what am I going to do? So, from Slack, you got to use emojis. So So I'm talking with my mentors, and I'm thinking, I got to go to business school. Like, that's what you do, right? Like, that's where you learn business. You like go to business school. So I like look up the GMAT, and I start looking at the business schools. And I'm thinking to myself, like, but this doesn't feel like me. You know, all due respect to, I have many friends, many colleagues who went to business school, but it didn't feel like my path. And so I'm talking to more mentors, and one of them suggested, you know, you're in Silicon Valley. Go work at a startup. Learn how it actually works on the mean streets of Palo Alto. So I decided to go work at a startup. And I made a very specific decision not to work at a startup as an engineer, because I had been an engineer. Now, by no means was I the best engineer, but I wanted to try something else. So I joined as a product manager. Any product managers in the audience? Awesome, awesome. So as a product manager, you have to develop one of the most important leadership skills that I now use to this day. You have to lead through influence and not through authority. The engineers don't report into you often. The designers don't report into you, but you have to form the vision. You have to sell the vision of the product. And that key learning of leading through influence and not authority, again, paid dividends. So I joined the startup. I do product management. Get some very interesting insights. I joined post-Series A of a small affiliate marketing startup, spent time with their board, had my first startup experience. But I realized, you know, this isn't, I'm learning, but I want to be a founder, right? Silicon Valley, that's what people do, right? They start startups. So I started a startup with a friend and colleague of mine, made every mistake in the book. There's a whole other talk that I could give about all the mistakes that we made. That company is now a lifestyle business that she runs. And then I started my second company, and my second company was the one where we raised venture capital and exited the company. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So with my co-founder, we started a marketplace for electronics. This is New York. Hopefully you all have heard of Etsy. It was the Etsy for electronics. We raised venture capital from many investors in the Bay Area, most notably Andreessen Horowitz. I spend a lot of time with those investors. And this is where I really got my MBA on Sand Hill Road. So Sand Hill Road is the road in Menlo Park, Palo Alto. It's quite nice, that is lined with venture capitalists. And you basically just drive from meeting to meeting, but you have to drive because these offices are expansive and beautiful and gorgeous. And so it's like walking through the woods and you arrive, there's a fountain, and then suddenly you're there. I'm not joking. So in building the company, and let me tell you, like, it's a struggle. I learned about how to figure out a total addressable market, how to read a term sheet, how to form a business plan, how to do marketing. Huge respect, marketing folks in the audience. That is a hard job. Very hard job. I had to work with our lawyers, work with our accountants. And so when we sold the company, and that's a whole other talk for another time, going through M&A, and now I'm often on the other side of M&A and corp dev discussions where I do a lot of M&A vetting for venture capitalists. I do M&A vetting for Slack. And so it's been really fascinating being on both sides of the table. You learn a lot about corporate development. So I exit that company, and I think to myself, what do I want to do now? It took 4 years of this MBA on the mean streets of Palo Alto. And I have this engineering background. I've always loved computers, as I mentioned before. And I'm like, what am I going to do? Where do I want to work next? So I made this list. And the way that I figured out the product I love, and there's a lot of products that I love, was I took out my phone, and I looked for the apps on the home screen of my phone. Those are the products I use day in and day out. And right there in the center where I spent most of my time was Slack. Now, my story with Slack started way before I went to work at the company. So when I was running Tindy, Slack came out of private beta, and we started using it because we needed a way to communicate with our team. Our team was distributed across the US. We were in hardware. People would often travel to China. So we started using Slack. Now, it was a lot more than just messaging. Yes, I could communicate with my colleagues, but I hooked in my any engineers out here? Nice, nice. So I hooked in my monitoring infrastructure. I piped all errors into Slack. All of our customer support tickets I sent into Slack. Salesforce hooked it up, sent information in there. I wrote custom integrations on top of the platform to flag high dollar value transactions. I sent it all into Slack. And then remember, this is like long before I ever thought about working at the company. And I was like, I love this product. I started joining community Slacks where I would spend time with other CTOs because let me tell you, like, misery needs company. Just the struggle. So after I sell the company, I decide I want to be, again, product I love, check that box. Fast growth, we'll talk about that in a second, absolutely. I didn't care as much about title, I just wanted to learn and I wanted to grow. One of the challenges at small startups is you're often dealing with small scale, or at least I always was. I wanted to deal with much, much bigger scale. And finally, I wanted to work for, I'm in engineering. I wanted to work for a boss who had managed a woman before. This is a big thing in engineering. And so when I interviewed, my boss, not only were there other director-level women, he had managed very senior women before. And I was like, fantastic, fantastic. So joined the company. This was 2.5 years ago. How many folks are familiar with Slack? OK, thank goodness, thank goodness. Thank you for your business. We deeply appreciate it. You know the product. We can skip that slide. So I joined in the blue part in 2015. And we didn't even have an infrastructure team at that point. And so into 2016, we formed infrastructure, asked me to lead, I step into the role of leading that organization. And when I look at this chart, you build very different systems, processes when you're in the green than as you slope into the red there. So incredible learning there. My team is 5x, the company is 3x in headcount growth, so huge, huge growth. That's a whole other slide about like how to scale yourself during hypergrowth. I'm giving that talk in a few months. So I watched the company mature from SMB, selling predominantly to startups like my own, to large corporations. 24/7, have to be available, have to be performant. So been part of that journey, and as we continue that journey. Internationalization and localization, been part of transitioning us into other markets, translating into different languages. So been a wild 2.5 years. So at this point, I want to talk about work. I want to talk about the future of work. We're all here. We work in enterprise software. We think a lot about work. So my nephew is a freshman at USC. And USC grads in the audience, OK? That looks like none to zero. Oh, one, very nice. Very nice. So my nephew is a little bit of a nerd, not unexpected. And he was always like, Julia, the coolest place in the world is Google. They have these like self-driving cars, and I love Google. And like, what do you do again? Like Google. And so it's funny because it's true. And he would visit us. My husband and daughter and I live in Mountain View, and he'd be like, I want to tour Google. So I'd like pull my strings, and he'd tour Google. So he shows up at USC, and this is this past fall. He shows up, and every single one of his classes uses Slack to coordinate and communicate. He works with his classmates on Slack. They turn in homework on Slack. He does recreational fencing. They organize the fencing tournaments on Slack. And he's like, I get it now. Like, this is what you do is actually, it's cool. And I was like, oh my gosh, the teenager thinks I'm cool. I've arrived. So he is going to graduate, and his cohort is going to graduate in 4 years. And they spend their life in messaging. When I was in college, I spent my life in AOL Instant Messenger and crafting away messages. Anyone else do that? And so I feel like I had some real good ones that I probably have forgotten. That's good. This generation, they want flexible communication. They want mobile communication. And that is bleeding into work. We talk a lot about work-life balance, but it's about work-life integration. It's all bleeding together. If you come up to talk to me after the talk, I'll tell you more about this photo. There's a good story behind this. It involves a television commercial. So rise of messaging platforms. Next one. One of my best friends, her husband runs an ice cream business. So such good ice cream in Seattle. And it's a small, medium business, and they need accounting software. So they found some accounting software on the internet. They started using it. They didn't like it, so they just downloaded other accounting software from the App Store. And now they use a different accounting software from another startup in Minnesota. And so with the rise of cloud, where you don't have to buy your own hardware and run your own data centers, the barrier to entry in starting a company, even an enterprise company, is so low that it is much easier to get into the market. And increasingly, enterprise users expect a quality consumer experience. He didn't like that accounting software because the UI was super, super janky, so he just chooses another one. And so we're in a world where we want that consumer-grade experience, and it's much, much easier to do that, and users demand it. Now, finally, my first job out of college, I had a desk phone on my desk. And I had a phone number, and people would call the phone. Like my coworker, like we weren't allowed to use, I wanted to use AIM, Instant Messenger. They wouldn't let us use it. So I had this phone, and I had to call people like on this land phone. So I memorized all their numbers. And if I wanted to work with them in person, I had to like run up 3 flights of stairs to talk to them or call them on the phone. And when I joined, the first day that I joined Slack, I show up, and they're like, oh, yeah, you don't have a phone, and you don't have a phone number. And all I could think was like, hallelujah. When I was at IBM, I had a phone, and I had a phone number, and I would purposely leave the voicemail inbox full because I didn't want any voicemails. It's like, my voicemail said, send me an email at this address. But work is very different from even when I started at that time. As I mentioned before, we want flexibility. This is a photo from one of our Slack offices where if you want to work in that little cove, like she looks so cozy and so happy, then like work in there. It all is bleeding together. And especially as my nephew and his colleagues join the workforce, they want that flexibility. Work and personal lives are all intertwined, for better or worse. Finally, what does this mean for all of us? Are we ready for the playbook? Yes. Okay. Fantastic. So we talked a lot about this earlier in the talk. In my job right now, even though I run a very, very technical organization, I am frequently in meetings with C-level executives, marketing, product, and increasingly I spend a lot of time with our CFO, and I need to understand how he thinks about our business. I need to understand the acronyms he uses. I need to understand his priorities. And so it is so critical to have that understanding about how the business works. Before I interviewed at Slack, I read a whole book on enterprise SaaS. I listened to about 10 podcasts on enterprise SaaS. I read the public filings of enterprise SaaS companies because I needed to understand how this business works and operates. Next step. So I'm an engineer. Product folks, raise your hand. Awesome. Marketing, love it. Maybe HR, who else? Excellent. Any other functions besides sales? So I got hired into my job because I am a great engineer. I'm a great engineering leader. But I didn't realize, and when I audited my time and I looked at my time, I spend most of my time selling. I am selling Slack and infrastructure engineering to candidates that want to join our team. I am selling the work of our team to the executives so they understand the value that we bring. I am selling our work to other engineering organizations so they understand what we do. This was not a natural skill for me. I am an engineer. I like factual lists. People don't want a factual list. They want a story. They want a narrative. They want something that hooks them in, not data points in a very nice bulleted list, as much joy as that brings me. So I had to spend a lot of time learning how to tell stories. And people say, are salespeople born or made? I don't know, but here's the thing. If you want to do something, the only way to get better at it is you got to do it over and over and over again. So I practice my narrative. I practice the stories that I tell over and over again. Refine, refine, refine. So we just talked about sales. We talked about career narratives, or we talked about telling stories. I hadn't realized that just as important as selling the work of my team so that they can progress, so that other people know their value, selling to customers, I didn't realize the importance of being able to also sell myself. So my LinkedIn, bulleted lists of facts. And I remember someone looking, after I joined Slack, again, we're growing really fast. We all look at who's viewed your profile on LinkedIn. And I started noticing that a lot of the people viewing my profile were from my own company, because they wanted to know who I was. They wanted to know what it is that I do. I remember my IBM days. That was before LinkedIn, but I would work with people all over the globe. And they would be like, well, who are you? What's your story? What do you do? Like, you're just a voice on the end of a conference call. And so suddenly, I was like, I realized I need to be able to tell my story. And I see this especially with women who have non-traditional backgrounds. I work with a woman who spent a lot of time in education. And she has a very different role now. And she would always fret, like, oh, people are going to pigeonhole me as one of those, someone who is very focused on education, but I've reinvented myself. Now I'm in tech. And I look at her LinkedIn, and I'm like, I look at this, and this is the LinkedIn of an education executive, not of a technology executive. So she hired a coach to help her rewrite her narrative. And remember, if you don't know where you're going, any path will take you there, and someone else will write the story for you. If you're in marketing, you know this. If you don't tell your brand story, someone else will tell it for you, and it won't be the story that you want. So you have to own your narrative. In my startup days, we had to have our elevator pitches. Anyone have their startup know your elevator pitch? Like, run into someone in the elevator, you need to be able to tell the 1-minute or 5-minute version. It's usually more like 30 seconds or 1-minute version of your company. You need to have that for yourself. What's your pitch? I'm good at this, I'm doing this, and hey, I'm looking at these types of roles next. Or for me, it's I need to hire this type of person. Own your narrative. And that brings us to the end. Thank you so much.